So what's up with campfires? Well, people do them for many different reasons, but usually the number one reason, and I'm going to be doing it tonight, I'm up in the mountains. It's cool, going to be cool tonight. So sitting around a fire after the sun goes down helps to keep you warm. Also, when you wake up in the morning, it's usually pretty cold when you wake up, and if it's already been cold all night. So having a fire in the morning is another possibility. You can cook on a fire. You can also, when you're sitting around, just enjoying the ambiance of the fire, the colors, the dancing of the flames, the crackling of the fire, the smell of the smoke. And if you're here with friends or with family, it's a great time to sit around the fire in the evening and socialize. And kids love making s'mores or toasting marshmallows. And I know some adults that like to do that as well. You'll need firewood in order to get things going. And where to buy it, you can buy it before you leave, grocery store, or there are different places. Big box stores sometimes carry it and they keep it outside their location. Or you can buy it at a store that's local to your campground. That way you're not transporting all that firewood all the way up until you get in the local area. And then you can also buy wood usually at the campground, and they'll tell you on the online reservation site if the firewood is available. How much is enough? Well, where I live, I pay $9 or $10 for each one of these bundles. And typically they'll burn for an hour and a half or 2 hours for a bundle. So I usually use 2 bundles a night, but based on the size of your group and how long you want to do your fire, you'll have to gauge how much firewood to bring on the trip. And I'm staying 2 nights, so I have 4 of these bundles. Now, if the campground has a fire ban going on where they don't allow the open fires, then your only option is to get like a fire can sort of thing that you connect to a propane tank, and then you can have your fire that way. The reason for the fire bans is, it's pretty hard not to know that there are fires that happen, usually in the warmer summer months. Quite a few fires here in California, so they're very strict about that. Most established campgrounds provide a fire ring, and oftentimes they'll have a grill that'll roll over onto the top. So you can see here, this can actually go back if you're just doing your fire, or you could cook right on this surface. I would typically, if I was using this, I would have a cast iron skillet or something on top so that I'm not going directly on that. I keep my campfire kit in a little bag dedicated to my igniters and my fire starters. And for my igniters, I have several different ways to go. You always want to have at least 2 or 3 that you bring out with you so that you have backups. But at the basic level, it's just standard matches that you can light. There's a little scraper thing on the side there. I keep it in a waterproof container. And then I have a Bic lighter, just a basic lighter. This is also by Bic, but it's more of a torch that you can use. And then this is a large torch, which really puts out a lot of fire. So I have all of these different ways to go. And then this is the kind of the old-fashioned way. This is called a ferro rod. And a ferro rod you use in conjunction with something that you scrape it, usually the back edge of your knife. And when you scrape along it, you can get a spark, and then the spark can light your fire starters, which I'm going to show you now. The purpose of the fire starter is to create enough flame for enough time so that you can now light your next level, which will be your little twigs and small kindling. And for that, I have several different ones. This is called fat wood, which comes from a pine tree. There's a resin in it that is very flammable. And so if you light a couple of these, they'll go for a while. These are like a waxed kind of a thing that you can light, and they also work. These are waterproof on the outside, but you tear one open, and then it reveals it almost looks like a cotton material there, but that's very easy to light now to get out of the waterproof material. And then this is about as free as you can get. It's lint from your dryer at home and a roll, what's left after you use a roll of toilet paper, and you just stuff it full and you light it and it'll go for a while. So these are options for fire starters. And then this, and I got this, these are only like $1 or $2. This is, if you have trouble lighting or your wood might have a little bit of moisture in it, and one of these ways may have trouble igniting your next level, if you light one of these go for like, I think they go for like 45 minutes and produce quite a good flame. It's made by Duraflame. I'm not pitching their products at all, but you'll see this on a lot of different shows where they talk about how this is kind of a fail-safe mechanism. So I always bring one of those. I try not to use it unless I have to. If your campground will let you, then you can collect twigs and dead brush from the ground. You don't want to collect anything standing, dead or alive, but things that are laying on the ground. And this is less than I would probably need to get the fire started, but I just grabbed a few of these things. They're very dry and it's wood, and so it's very easy to then light from the fire starters to get this lit. And then from there, we're going to go to larger pieces of kindling. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do some basic techniques for processing wood. And we'll use both a hatchet and a knife. And if you were actually going to try to split wood with a really hard swing down on it, this ground is pretty hard, so it has a good resistance. But ideally, if there's a stump there, you know, where you could set the wood down on top of the stump, that would be great. I'm going to put a horizontal piece across here, which is like an added layer of protection there. And when you're swinging it, usually when it's this size, there's enough flat surface area so it'll stand by itself at the beginning. But what I like to do is take another piece of wood that I have and actually hold down on top there. And then I come into it. There we go. And then if you hit down, and then the wood will start to split apart. Let's do one more. And we'll use the back of another piece of wood. I think you get the idea. And then you would keep doing this till it gets smaller and smaller till you get kindling sizes. Okay, so let's do one now with a knife. And I think I mentioned earlier, using a knife that maybe has a 5-inch or longer blade on it, because you want it to get all the way across. When you're first getting started, you pound on top, but then you have to move over to the side to get it going. I'm sorry, this one has a knot near the bottom, and the knots are kind of hard to do. All right, let's do one more. Gets easier as you go. And then again, you would just keep knocking it down until it gets a smaller size. Now, it's also helpful, especially if there's no twigs, to actually make some shavings. And you want to use your knife and you want to go at the edges to try to shave it down there. Do you see how we're making those shavings? And so you get a bunch of those. So those are the two basic techniques, both with a hatchet and with a knife, for processing your wood down to a smaller size. So now when we're ready to make our fire, and let's imagine that this is within a fire ring. I'm not actually going to light it here at this point, but you start with your fire starters, and then some of those shavings, or alternatively, if you find some really small twigs in your site, then you want to kind of put that stuff down, and because this will light really fast once that fire starter gets going. And then after that, that's going to create enough of a flame that we want to look for our next size pieces of wood. Cut that in half. And I like to do, you can do a triangle, but I like to do it as like a little house where I do 2 in one direction and then 2 in the next direction. Let's see what I've got here. piece. There. And then we can, well, let's not go too big there to get started. But anyway, you get the idea. You kind of go crisscross pattern. And then as it lights, that's going to create enough heat to then light these. And by having the pattern like this, I don't know if you can envision, but there are air gaps where the wind and just the general air can get in. You don't want to have this thing so dense that it almost creates a wall that prevents the fire from getting oxygen down in the bottom and the middle. So anyway, that's how you would do it, and then use your ignition with a match or with a torch of some type to get it started. And then once the flame starts to come and you can tell that all this is caught on, this is starting to catch fire, then you can slowly start to add bigger pieces. And I like to do kind of on an angle. I do it's almost like a little teepee kind of a motion here, where you would kind of get them going like that maybe. Actually, probably go a little bit higher here like that. And then we can go to our next size pieces of wood. And then we hope that these start to get lit. Then we can go maybe to this size. And then eventually we could work our way up to where we can now use some of the bigger pieces that were provided in our bundle. And then that'll get the fire going. And then from there, all you have to do is tend the fire. And you'll notice that as the fire's been going for a while, like let's say if this piece was going, the bottom might be getting really charred and actually on fire, but the top isn't getting much fire. So you want to, from time to time, look for pieces that have that going on and then turn them a little bit so that the fire has a chance to work on the other side of the piece of wood. And what I like to do is I use these long barbecue tongs to grab pieces of wood and then be able to turn them. And then for a measure of extra security, you might want to at some point get yourself some of these, they're like camping gloves or welding gloves that are very resistant to the heat and the flame to protect your hands if you're getting in close for things. Other people, you can use a shovel will work, or even if you have some sort of a poker like from your fireplace at home, that'll work fine. But I do love the barbecue tongs for doing my fire tending. And then the amount of wood to put on, usually once you've got it going and you add a couple of bigger pieces, that usually will go fine for 20, 30, 40 minutes. And then you're turning pieces as you go. So there's a little bit of work that goes along with it, but I think it's fun. And then you'll want to add on another piece as your flame starts to go down. What I'm describing now is for just one person or two or three, and all three of you can sit close to the fire. But if you have a larger group, maybe 6 people or 8 people, and everybody's ringed around the fire, you're gonna have to be further out for that number of chairs. And you may want to have a larger fire so that everybody can feel some of the warmth. So then you're gonna have obviously a bigger fire, and you'll want to plan appropriately with the correct amount of firewood to bring on the trip. So that's another way to go. And then the last thing I want to mention is when you have children on the trip and they're new to being around an open flame like this, you want to teach them to really be careful around fire. Certainly don't want to touch. Fire rings, which are metal, are super hot to touch. You can burn yourself very quickly by touching the fire ring. So children should be aware to stay away from that. And anyway, next level of fire making gets into maybe dispersed camping, where you're out away from a campground. You can do a lot of the same techniques I have here, but there's also the opportunity to find wood and process it out in the wild. You don't want to ever cut down anything that's living, but you might see a tree that's fallen down that's obviously dead. And what people do out in the dispersed camping is sometimes they'll bring a chainsaw to then start cutting the wood, or you can use saws, nice long straight blade to cut, and then when you move up from a hatchet to a larger one, then it's an axe, and 28 to 35 inch long handle on an axe. And there's special techniques for that, which is beyond the scope of what I'm going into right now. So that's kind of what happens when you get out into the dispersed camping. You can really find and process wood out in the field for that. Okay, well, for this fire, what I did was I put a couple of fire starters down on the bottom, and then, I don't know if you can see down there, but there's a bunch of twigs. This campsite had tons of twigs, so I piled on a whole bunch of twigs, lit that, and then I had some easy to light wood that I had from home. They're just like 2x4s, and I'm using that as kind of medium kindlings. And then I started putting some of the bigger ones then on top. So this fire, as you can tell, is already starting to really pick up steam. The dry twigs from the campsite really lit up because I did enough of those. And then, as you can see here, this 2x4 really caught on fast. But if you had smaller kindling, that would also catch on fast. And then you'd get a pretty good flame so that you can then start to light your bigger pieces. As you're adding items to your campfire kit, one thing that I've purchased that I really like, and it helps to get a fire started when it's more lukewarm and it doesn't seem to be really catching the way you want it to. You get one of these things, they're really small, they fit. This was in the tube here, but it fits right in your pocket. I carry it during my camping trips, and it's just a pocket bellows. And basically, it's just almost like an antenna that opens up. Small on one end, larger on the other end. You want the small end toward the fire, and you just blow through it, and it just directs oxygen right at the fire there, and then that helps to get it going a little better. So you can see how that really has a good effect on it. The next episode is going to cover planning your first camping trip. And if you're enjoying this content, please consider pressing the like button and subscribing so that you can catch the rest of the series as they come. And I'll see you on the next one.